Welcome to another episode of the Vinimark Podcast. In this series, we engage in conversations along the rough edges of wine commerce, science, cellar mastery, marketing, and the rising trends amidst the industry's more adventurous pioneers. Now, today is a particularly exciting episode because we get to speak to Rosa Kruger, the founder of the Old Vine Project here in South Africa. Now, I meet many wine lovers who think of the Old Vine Project as a cool marketing angle or perhaps an OLAC celebration of South African history. And while I'm sure there's plenty of value in those areas, that's not why I'm excited about today's conversation. Today, we want to talk about what Rosa's studies and hard work, which, by the way, are being referenced by viticulturists around the world, tell us about the future of viticulture. What excites me are the scientific studies that show just how different old vine grape juice is to those from younger vines, and how we can taste the age in a wine, not from bottle age, but from the actual age of the vines themselves. There is a whole other magical world to be explored through these old vines and through the scientific data that is being released. I'm hoping Rosa will take us there today. And if we're lucky, she may even be willing to share her thoughts on whether grapevines are actual sentient beings or not. Rosa, thank you so much for sharing time today. I appreciate you being with us.
Thank you, Jono, for the invitation.
I know you've been very busy, and I took up some of your time earlier talking about the exciting projects that you're working on. And while I know you can't mention anyone's names, can you tell us a little bit about the new project that is exciting you?
Yes, I'm doing two new projects. One that's particularly fascinating, to say the least. It's a new development we're doing in Polkadrai. It's against the Polkadrai slopes. The steepest slope is actually 34 degrees, which is very steep. I'm getting a clean slate. We can start afresh, which is absolutely fantastic. So we're developing the vineyards according to the natural lay of the land. We look at the contours and we plant the blocks within the natural contours of the land. So there's no square, vierkantige blocks. They're all long rows and short rows, but they respect the lay of the land. The whole idea of that is never to change the way that I can almost say that God gave us the land. We want to respect the land as it is and interfere as little as we can. So every drop of water that falls onto that land goes into a contour and gets transported all the way around the slope to a dam. So in the first place, in terms of climate change, we have to look very closely to the use of water and what we do with water. In so many blocks that I do, the rain comes, beautiful winter rain, and it rushes down the road and it erodes half your topsoil and it lands up in a ditch somewhere, never to be used. The way we design this vineyard or this slope is exactly the opposite. We try to avoid erosion, we try to respect soil health, and we try to utilize or harvest the rainwater. That's a very exciting project. I work within a fantastic team of scientists and practical guys and winemakers. We're a team of about 6, 7 guys, and it's just a very exciting project. In 5 years' time, you'll see the result, and hopefully, it's going to be as beautiful as I'm planning it to be.
See, this is one of the exciting things that I think people don't hear enough about. Often, when you think of Rosa Kruger and the Old Vine Project, you think about preserving old vines that are perhaps works of art or something that needs to be looked after in a museum, as opposed to realizing that the work that you've done studying older vines is every day informing new projects, new vine plantings, new vineyard design. And so I think this is what I want to unpack today. Now, we've spent a little bit of time talking about how vines age. You always talk about them as if they're humans, and I really enjoy your metaphor. So if we all as humans understand that when you're young, you're impulsive and you behave a certain way, or perhaps when you're older, you settle down and mature. Can you use that metaphor to explain to us a little bit what vines go through as they age? Often there's this sense or this idea that wine from young vines is bad wine or shouldn't be used or can't be quality, and that later on in life it magically becomes a much better product. Is this true?
You ask about 10 questions in one, Jono. You should have your questions more simple, please. But to go back to your first question, exactly because I see so many vineyards destroyed by erosion and by planting wrong that and seeing how fantastic old wines can be and how beautiful the wine can be. It's exactly because of that we now have devised a way to plant vineyards that would grow old naturally or more naturally. So the whole Andre Morgenthau has the phrase, he created the phrase plant to grow old. And so my work on old vineyards is just formed almost a foundation for my viticultural work for the future. But in terms of old and young vines, South Africa and the Old Vine Project has just been invited by the OIV, the Organization for International Viticulture. That's a group of really very clever scientists across the world, from Spain, Italy, France, Europe, the rest of Europe, Australia, Argentina, all across the world. They've invited us to be one of the top 3 panel members that will be spearheading research on old vineyards internationally. Now, for me, that's an enormous honor. When I started 20 years ago with this project, just writing down names on pieces of paper and dishing out vineyards to interested people. Now, of course, it's a completely different ballgame. It's since Andre Morgenthau started managing the project, it's become much more formalized. There's rules, there's members, there's a seal, which is the first in the world. So it's completely different to the way it started. But when I started, everybody was quite skeptical, When I went around asking someone for funding, they said, oh, it's a pretty project. But, we can't be too serious about it. I always believe there's something in old vines. And now the international world of viticulture actually confirmed that we must be able to learn from old vineyards, given the absolute incredible threat of climate change over the next 30 years. When I did the first old wine tasting in London before the Masters of Wine, I think about 10 or 12 years ago, the United Nations Special Committee on Climate Change predicted that in 2050, the winemaking world will be 2 to 3 degrees warmer than what it was then. Well, that has just been confirmed by fantastic work done by Dr. Tara Southey. I always get her name wrong, and she's really a huge attribute to our scientific world in South Africa. She's just confirmed it in her postdoctoral studies that in 2050, the inland area would be up to 3 degrees warmer than what it is now. So imagine you sit now in Stellenbosch and it's now high summer, 28 degrees or 33 degrees. Well, in 2050, which is not my lifetime, I'll be pushing daisies by then, but you'll still be around. It's going to be 3 degrees warmer. I mean, that is shocking. We can see the desertification from the west coast more inland. We can see this. In that sense, the research on old vineyards is crucial. And my thought about this has now just recently been confirmed by this group of international scientists, which I'm very, very proud of. Your question was, what is the difference between...
Well, no. So, I mean, I want to pick up on what you just said now. You're saying the research into old vines has been proved really important in coming up with solutions to the problem of climate change. Can you perhaps outline some of those outcomes or revelations in the studies that are helping you now?
We are just skimming the surface at the moment. The question, since I started with this project, I was always, when I stand in an old vineyard, I get quite, emotional about it. I feel so small because these vineyards have been around for some of them 120, 130 years. And I look at them and I thought, why did they survive? Is it the rootstock clone combination? Is it the row direction? Is it the planting density? Is it the grafting union? What is it? We have no idea. Why would one vineyard get to be 120 years old and the vineyard next door would be dying off? There's been very interesting results in the little bit of research that has been done. And I must say, South Africa is leading the world on old vine research. We have done various studies. Helene Nebo did a study at Stellenbosch University, which she found, and I'm not a scientist, I work in the field, so I speak a straight Afrikaans actually, but now trying hard to speak a straight English as well. She found that there's a definite difference between the structure and the mouthfeel of old vine Chenin as compared to young vine Chenin. And that old vine Chenin
Yes.
added new aromas to the existing aroma, what they call aroma wheel of Chenin. Dr. Johan Burger did that wonderful study on the difference between the juice of young vine pinitage and old vine pinitage. Same block, same slope, same clone, same rootstock, same everything. The only difference was the age. And they found that older vineyards make wine with more structure, better pH acidity balance, which is crucial in the South African climate, and they can be harvested at the same time, but at a better ripeness, at a lower bulling, but a better acidity pH balance, which is fantastic. And Jonathan Stein has done a study about 2 years ago and recently done another study, which is going to be quite interesting. His study that he's done 2 years ago showed that in the perception of the public, old vine wines are worth more than young vine wines. And with every age older that is shown on the label or the seal, they're prepared to pay a certain amount of rands more. And when we spoke we had an international seminar on the OIV last week, and I mentioned to the other scientists, well, I'm not a scientist, I mentioned to these scientists that we have done this research in South Africa. They were quite amazed that we have done this research. Now, everybody always says to me, older vines don't necessarily make better wines. I've never said that older vines make better wines. I've always said they make wines that are different. They make wines that have more structure, more intensity, more density, and a wider mouthfeel. Now, if Kathy van Zyl, yeah, I'm sure you know Kathy van Zyl, which I have the highest respect for, if she was sitting next to me now, she would have rapped me over the knuckles, saying your way to describe wine is very primitive. That's how I have had the most amazing privilege. About 10 years ago, I traveled with a very renowned international wine consultant to Argentina. And we tasted wines there from 5 different cellars. And my only job was, I wasn't allowed to say a word because I was the novice. My only job was to pour the wine and then afterwards to try and identify amongst 20 to 30 wines every day, the wines that were made from old vineyards. And lo and behold, I promise you this is true. After day 3 and day 4, I started getting it right. So I'd be sitting there with 20 wines and I'll push one wine forward and he will start smiling and nod his head. So you can, if you know what you're looking for, you can identify the wines made from older vineyards. They just have much more depth. And there's something, they're not so fleeting. It's silly to say that young vines don't make good wine. That's ridiculous. Because young vines make wines that are much more flamboyant, much more sexy actually, expressive. They're convincing. They're all over the show. They have no end. Where old vines are much more subdued, but much more restricted, much more understated, and much more classy, in my mind. Does that answer your question?
It does in many senses. I guess the question that would follow on from that is to ask, how do you suppose vines change in the way that they grow when they get older that results in a better wine? And just a statement to kind of support that is talking to Andre Morgenthau earlier this month. He was just talking about how the juice that makes it into the cellar from old vines comes in and just ticks box after box, correct acid, correct sugars, correct everything. There's just balance to the juice, almost as if it wants to be made into wine. And I'm trying to understand what are the physiological changes that happen in a vine that can deliver that.
I will answer that in a way that will confuse you completely, I think. I think, in my mind, nature are much superior to humankind. So if you leave nature to look after itself, we have seen that now during COVID. We have seen that in all the research that's been done lately about the man's destruction and destructive nature on planet Earth. If you leave a forest alone, it will blossom and it will support itself and will just grow better and better all the time. The moment humans are introduced to nature, they seem to be a little bit destructive in a way that has to do with old vines. And I'm getting very weird now, I know that, but that's exactly the way that I feel. If you manipulate a vineyard too much, a young vineyard, or a middle-aged vineyard, or an old vineyard for that matter, you seem to confuse the vine. Then it doesn't know where it is, what should it be, should it grow acidity, should it have more aroma. If you leave a vine alone to do its own thing, it will do its own thing to perfection, absolute perfection. If you walk into an old vineyard, if I walk into an old vineyard, and I do some of the oldest vineyards in the country, I prune them, I manage them, I do everything there with a team, of course, my wonderful team of people that I have in the vineyard, some of them which have been working with me for 21 years. If I go to a vineyard like that, I always say to them, guys, let's stand in a row and just, first of all, look at the scene and take 3 times, take a deep breath and just look at what we have. And don't try and dominate it. Don't try and have a recipe beforehand. Look at it and see rather how you can support it and help it rather than make it into the way that you want it. An old vine does not necessarily have deeper roots like some people believe. That study has been done by, it was recorded in a book written by David Simon and Professor Evan Sadi 4 years ago, and which they won an international prize in France, where the study found that an old vine doesn't necessarily have deep roots. It has more roots. So what I've done in one of my oldest vineyards, 121 years old this year, we interplanted in this vineyard, and according to the old vine rules, you can interplant 15%, which we've done there. So I've taken a vineyard that was 5 years old, right next to a vineyard that was 120 years old. I took the soil away, softly with little sticks, exposed the roots, and it was totally amazing. The old vines had many, many more roots than the young vines. The young vines had a couple of strong roots. The old vines had like a density of roots. So it's about the amount of roots. But one thing I've recently learned that I didn't always realize is a lot of the reserves of an old vine is stored in its stem, in the old wood. That's why we believe in South Africa, I know they do it different in other countries. I don't care how they do it in other countries, but in this country, I believe that we cannot cut back into the old wood because a lot of the reserves are stored somewhere in that little bit of life that's left still in the old wood. Now, why would an old vineyard make better wine? I can tell you what I think. I think, and even Ocho confirmed this. We were sitting one day having a cigarette. He was having a cigarette. I was having a glass of wine at Fairview, actually, on those slopes. And I said to him, what is it? Why do old vines make these wines with such personality? And he said, in a way, it's what they call a dying vine syndrome. So a vine that is getting now over its best and that's on its way out have fewer berries, and the berries are sweeter and more concentrated, so that birds would come, eat the berries, and spread the seeds, and that way there's new vines. So it's a process of, what is the word in English? Come help me. It's a process of where you have a lot of babies to come. The species don't end there. If Michael Frijon was here, he would have corrected me. His command of the English language, I just think, is unbelievably good. But in any event, I think that there's truth in that, but there's also, I try to live very close to nature. Even here where I live on the mountain in Riebeek, other side of Riebeek West, I try to really live close to the land because you can learn so much from the land. So there's a wisdom. You call it that English word that I can't pronounce, but I think it's an accumulation of memories of the climates and the season over years, over decades. So I have very few times I had to drop crop on an old vineyard, only when we fertilized and only when we manipulated too much. You have to drop crop. An old vineyard seems to know exactly what it needs to survive for another 20 years or another 50 years. It hardly overcrops. It has a very limited canopy. It has much more roots than leaves and shoots, which is the one thing that's another subject which I totally believe in. And so in a heat wave, it just sits there. It just doesn't bend in the wind. It just walks through a heat wave. It faces the climatic stresses of our extreme climate, and it doesn't fall flat like some vineyards do. Some young vineyards, a young vine in a climate climatic stress like a heat wave just seems to take all the juice from the berries, and then it causes what they call in Australia waterberry. So the grapes go, what we say in Afrikaans is oumans gesiggies. They go like wrinkly. That doesn't happen to an old vine. They just weather the storm and they ripen their grapes at their own pace because they have learned over the last 30, 40 to 100 years how to handle the climate. It's just years and years of memory that's caught up in those beautiful stems.
I suppose there's a misconception that clearly I have, that the Old Vine Project is out and about trying to protect and preserve these fragile old blocks. But what you're saying now is telling me, no, the vines are not at all fragile. In fact, they're tougher and more resilient than they've ever been. Would you say that's correct?
They are, but there's one exception, and it's weed control. But old vines really don't like too much because in the normal world, without human interference, there won't be these pioneer weeds that take over our landscape. There'll be a balance of growth. I mean, Johan Reinecke will tell you that. I mean, if you go to his vineyards, they always look a little bit scruffy because there's always green under the vineyards, but there's never one pioneer weed that take over. Now with old vines, because we've worked the soil over the years, we've interfered, we've disturbed the balance. There's always these pioneer weeds that take over, and old vines can't fight against them. So the one thing we definitely do is keep the vines as weed-free as possible, but also mulch them, that there's always some blanket over the bare soil, because bare soil is dead soil, and dead soil makes not good wines.
You mentioned earlier the process of interplanting, which, if I understand it correctly, is taking younger vines and planting and replanting them in amongst much older vines.
Yes.
Can you outline what that does for the older vines? And do the older vines, as you would in a human community, do they have a positive effect on the younger vines?
There's a book written, The Communication of Trees, recently. Someone gave me a copy about 2 years ago. That's an absolute fascinating book on how plants actually support each other and communicate with each other through different processes. For example, through the root tips, etc. It's a whole scientific discussion. It's actually been proven. It's not what people imagine. It's not an airy fairy like little dream. It's been proven by various universities across the world. So there is a way that plants support each other. In the Old Vine Project, we believe that you can replant 15% of a vineyard, because vineyards, the one thing that I always believed in is vineyards must be sustainable. If it's not sustainable, we're doing window dressing. And I don't believe in that. A farmer must survive, and he must earn enough money to pay his workers a decent wage. So we believe in replanting 15%. I've done that a couple of times. It's a whole process. It's not that easy. But if you do it properly, they flourish. They seem to be happy. It's not as if the old vines dominate the young vines. They seem almost to support the young vines. And they grow beautifully. I was so impressed with the old vines, the one block that I have here in Wellington. It's the oldest red wine block we have in the country, where we interplanted about 6-7 years ago, and it's in sand. It is just sand, and the vines there are 121 years old. So we interplanted, and I said to the winemaker that I think we're taking a hell of a chance. I don't think this is going to work. I mean, it's sand. If there's no irrigation, this can't work. But you know what? If you drive past now, the vines are beautiful. They seem to support each other. This is not science. I know it's not science. But if I look at it and I see how they flourish, there must be some kind of support structure between the old vines and the young vines.
Well, you mentioned a study earlier about the difference between old Pinotage vines and young Pinotage vines. And the study seemed to show that old Pinotage vines actually ripen more slowly, or they're able to be harvested much later in the growing season. Obviously, one of Pinotage's problems is that it can be in the habit of ripening too quickly. So I was wondering if interplanting might be a way to improve the performance of younger vines just by having them in the presence of older vines.
You have it wrong. Your assumption is wrong.
Okay,
The study
correct
didn't
me.
show that they That's the way we work in my team. You should one day sit in one of our discussions. Like I said,
No, it's the best way to work. Yeah.
like the bulldozer man and the soil scientist, and we don't spare our words. Time is of the essence. The study didn't show that the old vine pinotage takes longer to ripen. I don't believe at all in hanging time like the Californians do in California for their vineyards. We don't want the vines to ripen over a long period. We just want them to ripen at a steady pace. And that is what that vineyard did. It did show that the old vine pinotage ripened. It was ripe at a lower bulling. That's what it showed. It was ripe at a very good pH acidity balance at a lower bulling. So where the young vines had to have a bulling of 25, 26, the older vines had a lower bulling at full ripeness. And that's what we want. And that's the thing with young vines. Very often they have to be really ripe to be physiologically ripe. With older vines, you can pick grapes at 2 to 3 bulling earlier at beautiful, perfect ripeness. And for me, that's crucial in South Africa because we don't want our vine to hang and ripen through all these heat waves. That's the first part of your question. The second part, now I forgot what I wanted to say.
The second part of the question was wanting to know if the effect of older vines could improve.
Yes. There's also studies done years ago already, and I think it was in Australia, which is I found absolutely fascinating. But I find a lot of things fascinating in my life. Tim James always says to me, "You are so irritating because you like everybody and you find things fascinating." Well, I'm sorry, but I do. What this study showed is that if you interplant different varieties, never mind different ages. So say you interplant Cabernet Franc, Cabernet, Merlot, whatever, in one vineyard, they seem to ripen closer to each other. So say there's a Cabernet Franc block and a mile away there's a Cab block. They will ripen, normally they'll ripen 2-3 weeks apart, sometimes a month apart. When you interplant them, they only seem to ripen 2 to 3 or 4 days apart. Why is that? Is it the flowering that is the bees? Has it to do with the pollination? What is that? I don't know I never followed the study so closely that I can give you the answer to that. I'm not sure even that they understand why it happened, but it is a fact that it happens. So if there is that kind of support between varieties, I'm sure there's that kind of support between age of vines as well. Because I found very often that if you plant young vines amongst old vines, if you just do that correctly, and there's a whole process to that they seem to support each other. Yes, I do think that.
I guess that is more evidence for the assertion that you mentioned earlier about plants communicating through their roots with each other.
That's right. If you ever find that book, you should read it. It's a fascinating book.
Okay, so changing tack a little bit, I spent some time talking to Conrad Flop from Strandveld, and he has been talking about he's trying to reinvigorate some of the vines that produce grapes for the Poffa de Ros Sauvignon Blanc. He asserted that Sauvignon Blanc vines seem to die young. Now, these Poffa de Ros vines are trellised vines, and they are prone to dead arm disease. Now, in Stellenbosch, Vieira wines, on the other hand, have some very old Sauvignon Blanc bush vines, which is fairly unusual for Sauvignon Blanc. So my question is, do bush vines age more safely than perhaps a trellised vine, or do training techniques have nothing to do with it?
Two answers to one question. Some varieties just naturally age better than others. Sauvignon Blanc and Cabernet Sauvignon are more susceptible to woodborne diseases like Utaipa or dead arm disease. It's the same thing for what we call in the field tandpyn. It's such a lovely word, isn't it? Toothache. When some of your teeth just fall away with age. I love that word. But Cabernet Sauvignon and Sauvignon Blanc don't age that easily, that's for sure. That's the one question, the answer. The other answer is that training techniques or pruning techniques most definitely have an influence on the ageability of vineyards. That is one of the questions the OIV, I think, is going to consider over the next couple of months in their research. Why do some vineyards age better than others? Well, in South Africa, some of our oldest vineyards most of our oldest vineyards are bush vine vineyards. Why? I firmly believe because, and I don't say I'm right, that's just what I think. I might be wrong, but that's my experience. Is in old vines, bush vines, in bush vines you only always cut into 1 or 2 year old wood. You never cut into the old wood. With trellised vineyards, you often cut the candles away and you cut into older wood. Now, young wood don't get you typer as easily as older wood because there's always sap flow that pushes the eutyper spores out. Where when you make a big pruning wound into old wood, it doesn't what we call bleed, it doesn't push out the sap flow. So there's lots of time for that spore to sit there and cause dead arm disease. I think that is really true. But someone in the seminar that we did with the OIV the other day said, when you prune old vineyards, you always just prune into young wood. So you never prune into the heart of the wood. You only prune here at the top slightly, and that's what we teach in our pruning classes, which I'm also quite proud of. Is when we stand in front of a vine, and I say to the guys, look at the wood. Where's the good wood? I always say to them, prune to your good wood. Staan na jou goeie hout toe. Waar's die goeie hout? It's the strong wood. So if it's a weak shoot, we cut it to one eye. If it's a very good shoot, we cut it to 2 eyes or even 2 tuppies or 2 spurs. So we rebuild the old vine from younger wood, not from the existing structure. We form a new vine. And we've seemed to have recreated vineyards. No, the recreate is such a presumptuous thing to say. We seem to have invigorated some vineyards with this technique. Because we've had vineyards we harvested 0.5 ton a hectare, now we're harvesting 4 tons a hectare, only because of different pruning techniques. And I firmly believe that a bush vine naturally has a longer lifespan than trellis vineyards because of the way that you prune it.
But I mean, that's revolutionary data to have, because I think, especially to farmers around the country who may be skeptical about this old vine project and who are saying to themselves, I've still got to pay my bills. Old vines don't produce high yields. So how am I going to pay my bills? Therefore, out they go. And what you're saying is you've had experiment or projects where you've raised the yields by 8 times. That's incredible.
Yes, it is, but it's still a low yield. And whatever we say, we can be very fancy, we can run around the world and talk about old vines, but the farmer still has to pay his wages and his bond and his tractors. So we have to pay more for old vine grapes. But that's another subject. I mean, at 4 tons a hectare, I know the sums like the palm of my hand. I know exactly what it costs to run a vineyard. I know exactly what it costs to establish a vineyard in different areas, in different trellising systems. We have to, at 4 tons a hectare, you do not make money unless you get, and now David Clark will correct me if he was here. I don't get paid at least 15,000 rand a ton at 4 tons a hectare, I'm not making money as a farmer. But that's a different discussion. And I think it's a very important discussion to have eventually. Because whatever we say in this country, we do not pay enough for our grapes. Old vines, young vines, very few people pay enough, and very few farmers can survive on what they paid at the moment. That's why a lot of farmers just farm bulk. But that's another discussion.
Well, therein lies the importance of studies by Jonathan State saying that we have market data that shows that consumers are willing to pay more for old vine wines.
Exactly. That's why the studies that the OIV now is going to do internationally will probably say exactly the same. And I've always believed that the Old Vine Project is on the right mission, but it was a bit of a mission initially. Now it's being supported by science, and that I'm very happy about.
Now, with regards to the sorts of old vines, in South Africa, it feels like people only ever talk about Chenin Blanc, and you mentioned the Wellington block of Cinsault. Whereas if you go to Spain, it's old Garnacha vines, or in California, you've got old Zinfandel vines. Here in South Africa, are there some cultivars that perhaps we know less about that are proving to have promise as old vines?
In the old days, we didn't have the nurseries that we have now. So what the farmers used to do, they used to go to the neighbor or some guy that was, say, in the 1900s or 1880, post-phylloxera, of course. They used to go to a farmer next door and say to him, I want to plant vineyards, can I take some cuttings? And whatever was in that field is what was planted, what was propagated and planted in his field. So I had the privilege 3 years ago to walk with a group of, now I must get the word right this time, paleographers, yes, variety specialists from Antwerp, France, to walk in a field like we walked in that Chenin Blanc of Adi Barnors. And they would walk and say, this is Chenin, this is Riesling, this is Colombard, this is Palomino, different things, just by looking at the leaves. And it's not as easy as you think. It's quite difficult, but most of our own vineyards are completely interplanted. For example, they might be 80% Chenin, but there will be 10 or 20% other varieties. Often the mix is Chenin, Palomino, Colombard, Muscat, and even some Riesling. The oldest varieties in the country is definitely Cinsault, Muscat de l'Alexandrie, Palomino, some old Grenache, not as old, but some old Grenache and Pekingese Kloof as well. Grenache Noir, not Grenache Blanc. And what else? It's Colombard, a little bit of Colombard that came later, Palomino, Muscat de l'Alexandrie, Cinsault, and Chenin, of course.
I'm personally am very excited about Muscat as a dry white. Uh, are there projects that are exciting you with regards to this particular cultivar?
There's a beautiful vineyard other side of the Kloof Pass that was planted according to the KWV or the pre-KWV era. In that time, vineyards only were recorded since 1900. So I think, if I remember correctly, we have about 9 vineyards in South Africa that was assumedly planted in 1900. But some of them, of course, were planted before 1900. They were just being recorded as planted in 1900. So that vineyard, the Muscat de l'Alexandrie vineyard, the other side of the Kloof Pass, was planted according to documentation in 1880. And it's a lovely vineyard. It really is. But for some reason, no one yet could, and correct me if I'm wrong, but no one yet could make the perfect dry Muscat de l'Alexandrie from very old vineyards. If there is one out there, I would love to taste it. Please send it to me quickly, and I'd love to taste it. But I think that could be very exciting.
So I feel like we've covered a lot of points, which, yeah, it's enormously exciting to hear about the process or the progress that you guys are making. And certainly the benefits for the industry at large are untold. But I wondered now, with you looking forward to the rest of 2021 and 22, what are the challenges that face the Old Vine project? What are the giants that you have to overcome?
Funding, as always with any of these pro bono, it's a project, it's funding. We seem to be able to pay our way since the seals, more people are buying seals, and after the research that Jonathan Stein will publish in September from UCT, more people will buy seals. I promise you'll see. The results are quite astounding. We seem to be able to pay our way with our own funding. But the Old Vine project is run by Andre Morgenthal, and he runs it brilliantly with the help of Nadia here, who's very, very strong and very supportive and very dependable. But they're only there half time. We don't have a single person running the Old Vine project that's fully employed. I've been doing it for free since I started. That was my promise to Salvis when I started the project, and I'm still doing it for free. So if we can get more funding, we could be more active in the fields of research and the fields of visiting the farmers and talking to the farmers and showing them how to prune and doing more training. I believe strongly that the training of the people that work the land is absolutely crucial, because through pruning you can destroy a vineyard or make a vineyard live 20 or 30 years longer. And very often our pruners are not trained, our farm workers are not trained. They're the lowest paid people in the area, and they're not trained. I would love to have more money to train more people. So if anybody wants to give us money to train more people and to contribute, it would be very much appreciated. That's for sure.
We've discussed before the necessity for a culture of viticulture
Exactly.
that needs to
Yes.
be set in.
The old days, I grew up on a farm, and not a wine farm, but a farm. And I'm sure in this area, in the old days, the people used to live more on the land. Now they don't live on the land anymore, but they used to live on the land. I don't say it was a good or a bad thing. I'm just saying what I experienced. So the opa and the father and the son would be sitting there, and the toddler would be running around there naked. So the father would say during harvest, yes, this man, we harvested this vineyard today, and half the grapes are rotten. And the grandfather would say, but I told you you're not pruning correctly, and I told you you're going to get rot because it rained, you didn't take the leaves away. So there was a culture of viticulture. There was a passing on of knowledge from one age to the next. Now it's disappeared. People don't live on the land. Very few people still live on the land. Now they live in the towns and they get transported with buses and there's not that culture of viticulture between generations anymore. Those old vineyard workers that taught me to prune, that's a dying breed. So we have to retrain from scratch and we have to train the people. I've trained many people in my life, and to see them understand it and grasp it and then communicate with you and discuss it and then laugh about it and tease it, that's a wonderful process. And that's what we need more of in this country, I think.
I mean, it feels like it's appropriate to come full circle because it sounds like what you're talking about is taking some old viticulturists and interplanting them amongst the up and coming generation.
That's a beautiful way of putting it. Some of the best people that I know in viticulture today are people that work the land, not people at the universities, not the people that have the degrees, but the people that are in the field every day, men and women.
Rosa, thank you so much for taking time to talk today. I know I've gone far over time, but it was simply because I've found what you've had to say fascinating.
Thank you so much, and good luck with the rest of your podcast. I'm eager to listen to them.
We've reached the end of another episode of the Vinimark Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing to the channel so that you can join us for more conversations around wine commerce, wine science, cellar mastery, marketing, and the rising trends amidst the industry's more adventurous pioneers.